Thanks, Tracy. Glad everybody is joining us here. Want to talk just briefly, just introduce Analytics 8. We're a data and analytics consultancy. We've been doing this data and analytics exclusively for about 15 years, and excited to share some of the things that we have learned, especially here very recent times, about what folks are seeing with cloud, especially as we're facing these new challenges with the pandemic. We can go on and talk about the agenda, which I think is what's coming up next. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about why some of our clients and why many organizations are moving to the cloud, a few really high-level recommendations to guide your move, and then we're going to turn it over to Chance, who's going to get some really practical tips and instructions on how to move to the cloud. There's a lot of content in Chance's section of this presentation, and I'm really excited to be able to share that. He's going to talk about not just our methodology and what we do, but what he's seeing with clients and what really works. So with that, I'm going to start talking about why move to the cloud, and we can move ahead. So there's right now, one of the things we're seeing is a lot of companies are working to enable their remote workforces. So everyone is thinking about now because of this pandemic. There's a lot of urgency to get everyone effective working from home, and you don't, strictly speaking, need to be in the cloud to enable remote work, but it's much easier if you're in the cloud and not trying to rig a solution together that was really designed to work only behind corporate firewalls and often in a handful of physical locations. And if a significant amount of your business applications or a significant amount of your business is not currently in the cloud, I can guarantee that you're struggling right now to equip your employees to work from home. You'll be dealing not only with hardware, you're getting hardware to your employees, but you'll be struggling with training, security, and even just basic connectivity. This is reason enough to move to the cloud, but it's not the only reason. We'll probably advance the slides here if we could. So clients are asking questions like, do all of our decision makers have access to the data and tools that they need, especially now that they are all working remotely? And what kind of effort is it going to take to scale up a promising prototype, or just boost performance on useful but slow apps? Or how are we going to handle upcoming complicated and expensive, and in some cases millions of dollars worth of hardware upgrades just to get to the point of developing analytics in the cloud? So the plans that folks have had at the beginning of 2000 have been really sidelined and replaced with new plans, and organizations to not only survive the pandemic but also fulfill their missions through the lens of the pandemic. We've been working with our clients to develop the basic analytic capabilities they need to quickly adjust. What's been striking to me is that our clients in the cloud have been able to move much more quickly than those not in the cloud. So there's a few reasons for that. We talked about kind of the enabling the remote workforce, which are the things that's facing us right on our face right now. But probably the most important reason to move to the cloud is because cloud infrastructure is specifically designed to scale up and down with great ease. Meaning you can quickly move on things that work and shut down initiatives that don't work with minimal disruption. You can do prototyping on very powerful hardware and software for a fraction of the cost and the time that it takes to buy and manage in-house systems. And if a prototype gets developed into a production-capable system, it's fairly fast and easy to scale it up. And you can scale it up not only to your entire workforce, but to vendors, clients, and other stakeholders in your organization. Another big reason is simplified infrastructure management. Hardware upgrades, OS patches, and all kinds of low-level stuff is handled by the cloud vendors. Security is better if it's set up right. Additional features and entire ecosystem of software is available fairly easily, although often at an extra cost. In every way that matters, the cloud vendors provide a better and simpler IT and data and analytics-based platform than almost either company can do on their own. And we'll get to it in a moment, but you don't have to get everything from say Amazon or Microsoft. But those base platforms are the infrastructure as a service platforms are what I'm talking about in terms of kind of the getting started. But you got to be careful, because simplified infrastructure management doesn't mean no infrastructure management. A cloud-based cloud vendor can handle a lot of the low-level stuff. They don't administer and maintain your applications. the cloud, the cloud platform itself needs to be managed, or else you'll have security holes and potentially have huge cost overruns when you should be seeing cost savings. Speaking about cost savings, a lot of folks, you may hear, CapEx versus OpEx as the reason to move to the cloud, but more important to whether you expense or depreciate a new system is the fact that a cloud platform enables much greater cost transparency and supports departmental cost chargeback models. Flexible pricing models based on how you use the system usually means you can save costs over the lifetime of the effort when you consider all the costs. And all of the vendors have costing calculators to help you figure out the cost differences between an on-prem or a cloud-based deployment. So I want to talk a little bit about our clients in the cloud. So I've spent the last month talking to a lot of our clients and understanding what they're facing and how our company can help them, and just understanding what's going on. And one thing that's that I've noticed is that clients are realizing that remote work is working, and their cloud-based applications, including their analytics, are key to supporting them. They're using cloud to support on a wide variety of devices and connectivity methods. One client has successfully enabled over 1,000 workers to work remotely, even though they didn't have a work-from-home culture. A substantial portion of their IT infrastructure was in the cloud, and that enabled them to do that fairly quickly. Another client, just as an example, is in a similar industry and had negligible cloud infrastructure, and they're still struggling to enable their workforce. And even though the industries are the same, it's a very big difference between those two clients that I've spoken to. Our clients are prototyping new analytics and new capabilities in the cloud. They're testing out and measuring the adjustments they're made in their businesses. For example, Anheuser-Busch is a client that we've been working with for quite a while. They've enabled production and distribution of hand sanitizer instead of beer in some areas to support production and distribution of for themselves and their suppliers, and keeping everybody safe and supplying a need that the marketplace had, and tracking that. And suppliers and essential businesses, they're optimizing their factories and supply chains, and most organizations are taking a deep look at their employees and figuring out how to keep them safe and employed if possible. So, we're seeing a lot of work in distribution and logistics, and we're seeing a lot of work in HR right now. So if you're not in the cloud, your competitors probably are. So last year, our customer base crossed the 50% threshold for a cloud-based architecture. It's fully mainstream, it's been vetted, it's safe, and it's effective. And if you're not in the cloud now, with a few rare exceptions, you're living in the IT past, and your competitors who have adopted cloud-based analytics will have an advantage over you. It takes a lot of planning, though, to get that right. I'm going to start out with three just really high-level recommendations to kind of set the stage, to get you thinking about moving to the cloud if you're not in the cloud already. So the first one is to pick a cloud or infrastructure as a service provider and stick to them. We recommend probably in this order or close to this order: AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud. Those are the three leaders. Microsoft and Amazon have, it depends on what time frame you're looking at, but 70–80% of the market, with Google Cloud coming in third. Those are very robust platforms. They have software to cover all of your analytics needs. Two other platforms are worth mentioning. I wouldn't recommend building an entire analytics solution on these platforms, but both Salesforce and SAP have their own sort of proprietary systems that aren't quite as open as, say, AWS or Azure. But if you're on Salesforce, Salesforce now owns Tableau, which is fantastic software, but it's not all integrated, and it works well, with the Salesforce data and the Force.com platform. SAP on a similar level has a great ecosystem of SAP-focused software. So if you use SAP ERP, you may want to look into SAP. But for general purpose, definitely recommend looking at AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. And a key point here is you don't need to get all of your software from these vendors if you pick one. They're all capable of running, at least AWS Azure and Google Cloud are very capable of running software from other vendors. We typically recommend a best of breed approach and pick the software that works right for you. So the second recommendation is to get a cloud optimized database. So you're going to need a place to put your data. So you're going to move your data assets to the cloud. That's kind of key. That's the core of your system. One of the great pieces of software that's come out here in recent years that's such a big deal is Snowflake. We've built a practice around Snowflake. It's so important, but it allows petabyte size. OLAP needs. OLAP stands for Online Analytical Processing. Basically, your analytics databases. It's great for sharing data for syndication if that's something that you are doing or need to do. It's great for consuming and analyzing streaming data in real time, and it's just very easy to use, easy to deploy. It's one of the really great pieces of software that's really become prevalent here in the last couple of years. So that's one to look at. If you're on AWS, good options are Amazon Redshift or Amazon Aurora. Amazon Aurora is a wrapper for Postgres or MySQL, but those are capable of handling very large data volumes and very intense applications as well. For smaller scale, and by small scale, I don't mean very small. I mean, you can still run very large, depending on your definition of large, needs on more general purpose databases and open source options like MySQL or Postgres. Internally to Analytics 8, we actually use Postgres for our internal system, and it works well for us. On Microsoft, if you're on Azure, we recommend taking a look at Synapse. That's their very large relational database option. And then SQL databases, which is what they're calling SQL Server, scales up very well as well. And then on Google Cloud Platform, you're going to look at Google Cloud SQL. That's built for it. The key here is a relational database as the core. There's NoSQL, Hadoop options as well. You want to look at those only after you've got a good relational database in place and you have specific needs for certain types of data. But look at a relational system, and these are the ones that we would recommend taking a look at first. The third recommendation is to get some experts on your side. So you can build or hire internally if you've got the teams to do it. But if you don't, it's very easy to make mistakes. Get sidetracked, get focused on things that aren't important. That's one of the things we do at Analytics 8 is help our customers get on the right track and stay on that right track. There's other organizations out there that are capable like we are, but I suggest that you find one and work with them. And unless you may have those capabilities in house, but I should suggest you take a real hard look and see do you really have that expertise, and get some experts on your side. So that's the third recommendation. And now I think we're going to transition over to Chance, and Chance is going to give us some very practical, tactical instructions on how to actually move to the cloud and what steps you can take to do that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Chance.
All right, thanks, Dave. And thank you all for joining us today. Through this next section, we're going to walk through the street-proven approach to migrating analytics workloads to the cloud that we use with our clients. And we just want to share with you some of these tips so you can consider them as you go through these projects yourself. So we hope to glean some insights that'll help you on this cloud journey. And it is pretty content dense, and I won't speak to every point on every slide. So if you have questions about something that we've not covered in enough depth, just let us know, and we'll either get back to you in the chat or get back to you later on. So one of the biggest advantages of the cloud is that the barrier to entry is low, and it's very easy to spin up a server and start playing around. We recommend that you balance that with proper planning to ensure that your organization is prepared and bought in from a financial, from a process and a governance perspective, but also with cultural readiness in mind. You want to validate the technology and license agreements, support a cloud model, define an execution, testing, and communication plan to minimize the impact of business users. And then, something that is more important in the cloud or more available in the cloud than typical on-premise deployments is planning to continuously optimize your workload to leverage the rapid pace of innovation and agility that the cloud offers. So as with most analytics projects of any magnitude, we recommend that you start with an assessment and first determine if you're ready to make the move by reviewing your current environment, your corporate and remote workforces, business needs and priorities. Take a look at your data, your regulatory and security concerns, any existing on-prem or cloud infrastructure, your applications and dependencies. And with a firm understanding of your operations and your existing assets, you'll have a better idea of the best path forward as you begin to develop a robust plan to handle your migration. So we typically start with a cloud readiness assessment where we evaluate systems, processes, and cultural readiness. And we recommend that you start with one-on-one information gathering sessions. You'll want to do this with both key IT and business stakeholders. We want to work to identify common goals and areas of misalignment among stakeholders. And it's really important that we ensure that across business and IT and across lines of business or various divisions, there's a common understanding around what a cloud migration means to the business and what the expected results will be when the project is completed. We'll capture your current state of infrastructure and apps, capture your business needs and your current and future business needs, and then critically determine who's going to own the initiative. If it's going to be IT, you want to make sure you identify a strong business partner to ensure that business continuity and that perspective. If business is going to own it, then make sure you're partnering with IT to ensure alignment with their roadmap, as well as how you operationalize and manage the environment whenever the project is complete. Next, you want to define, and understand what are your goals and opportunities here. Is your goal to reduce costs, maybe through lower capital commitments or decommissioning data centers? Or is it to increase your cost transparency, perhaps within an ITIL framework where you're passing IT costs back to the business? Are you looking to increase performance, maybe leveraging auto-scaling or self-healing capabilities, or just to go through rapid hardware changes as your business scales? Or is it to increase agility, to try new things and fail or succeed faster, to innovate and be able to stay ahead of your competition? Next, you're going to want to determine your cultural readiness. And this is something that's often overlooked. Have your key stakeholders bought into the cloud, and are they prepared for a shift in the mindset that it brings? Is your organization prepared to address the technical debt and move away from legacy systems? Maybe finally flip the switch off on that old AS400 that's been hanging around. Are you open to cloud native approaches where the greatest benefit comes from agility and not just a lift and shift to a new data center? Ultimately, if your key stakeholders are thinking of a cloud migration as simply a move to a new and quote unquote cheaper data center, they're really missing the point and the opportunity. Next, we want to nail down what will be migrated, which applications, which processes, what infrastructure. And this is especially relevant for data and analytics workloads, as you want to make sure that you think through your data volumes and your network latency, so that you don't get in a situation where you're trying to push, a terabyte of data over a small network pipe. We want to make sure you've considered license stipulations. There are some legacy stack vendors who have stipulations around where you can deploy, where your hardware can sit, whether it has to be in your data center or whether it can be in a cloud data center. A lot of them are adapting to the times, but there's still some old agreements that have stipulations around that. So it's something to consider. Then the last step here in our cloud readiness assessment that we recommend that you go through is to do a TCO analysis. Your total cost is more than just server costs. Keep in mind that physical data center property, cooling and electricity, and security are all, physical security of the building are all factors. You've got disaster recovery and co-location, and you've got hardware and licensing costs, and then you have your data center staff. But this is kind of an interesting point too, that if you are thinking about a move to the cloud, but you're not planning on decommissioning your existing resources, then you're adding to your costs, right? It's similar to our current dynamic with everybody working from home. There's a lot of speculation that this will be a new thing and that a lot of businesses will do more of that. And it represents an opportunity for cost savings. But if organizations still maintain the existing leases and all their office space, then you're not going to realize that cost. And the same is the case with the cloud. If you move to the cloud, but you're not going to be shutting down that old VM host, or you're not going to be, you're not going to stop paying for that commercial database license that you've had, then you're not going to realize the same level of cost savings, obviously. All right, so this wraps up the core components of the initial assessment. And ideally by this point, you'll have a firm understanding of where you're coming from, where you're going, and who's going to support you along the way. So the next step we recommend for you is to develop a plan. We begin with a workload assessment and prioritization. And the goal of this component is to determine what can and cannot be migrated to the cloud. Many will start with a database platform migration, and this can be a lift and shift or a migration from a legacy database to a cloud native database. We've seen an interesting trend lately in that more companies are open to embracing open source architectures and specifically open source database engines like Postgres or MySQL, as Dave mentioned earlier. And they'll use these to replace your proprietary and commercial offerings like Oracle and SQL Server to reduce your costs a little bit. From there, you'll want to determine the mechanism of data ingestion. Will it come from an on-premise system or maybe a SaaS platform? This all factors into how much you need to invest in your network and interconnectivity between your on-premise environment and your cloud environment if you're going to have a hybrid approach. And then where you source your data from and what platform you're pushing it into will guide your decision around whether you leverage an existing on-prem ETL or ELT framework, or if you migrate your data transformations to a cloud native or cloud-enabled tool or framework. So even if you're not moving your database or other source systems to your cloud environment, analytics platforms are another common first move to the cloud, your front-end BI tools. In many cases, you can start with a lift and shift to an infrastructure as a service provider. And in other cases, you may want to consider replacing or replatforming to a SaaS offering from the same vendor or a different vendor. You want to make sure that you don't neglect any embedded analytics or integrations. And I'm talking about things like embedding dashboards in Salesforce or SharePoint, mashup frameworks, or other third-party tools. And then one of the most critical elements that is often overlooked until the latter part of the project is to determine your authentication mechanism. You want to ensure that you've thought through the implications from that standpoint. You next need to determine if the appropriate platforms determine the appropriate platforms for your migration. And it's possible that different cloud models will be employed for different parts of the same overall workload. So from top to bottom, we've first looked at common SaaS platforms. These are turnkey offerings, and they provide you with an application as a service. You're completely insulated from, and you're unburdened by the entirety of the tech stack behind the scenes here. Next level down, we see platform as a service offerings, and these allow greater control, but require more management than your SaaS offerings do. Snowflake's a good example of this. And then lastly, we have the option that most of us consider when we think of cloud migrations, and that's infrastructure as a service. So AWS and Azure are two of the most common options for consideration here, and these platforms are best equipped to support a broad variety of analytics workflows, but they also require greater investment in the planning phases and the continued operational management. It's worth noting that platforms like AWS and Azure have offerings that span all three of these service types. So while traditionally thought of, again, as infrastructure as a service providers, both have platform as a service offerings like Microsoft Azure SQL and Amazon RDS, as well as SaaS offerings like Amazon QuickSight or Power BI. And again, it's not uncommon to leverage more than one of these options in a comprehensive cloud-based modern data architecture. So with our platform selection taken care of, we'll next need to consider the macro execution plan. With a big bang approach, the project can generally be completed faster, but it's also going to bring greater risk. So consider where your analytics workloads fit within potential larger enterprise cloud migrations if that's on the table. A phased approach is generally going to take more time, but it allows smaller teams to better support business segments by enabling the migration team to focus on smaller chunks of the workload at a time and realize that value incrementally. So consider breaking it out by business unit or by end user application, and make sure that you break up some of the complexity into separate phases so that you can reduce the risk of each phase. The third option here is the hybrid approach, and that often entails deploying the full architecture, all of your databases, your platforms, getting everything configured, connected up, and talking, but then doing a phased deployment of the content itself. So that you still reduce some of that risk, but you don't have to worry about the configuration later down in the project. So this often means that you'll run your legacy stack and your cloud deployment in parallel for some period of time until you can comfortably cut over. All right, so once you have an understanding of your macro migration approach and have that in mind, you can carefully consider the individual needs of each tool or workload and determine the best micro execution plan, because one size does not fit all when it comes to this. Now, a common industry term for these micro execution approaches are the 6R. And so starting at the bottom, first you want to consider what's going to be retired and what's going to be retained as it currently exists. And this is going to enable you to immediately trim down your areas of focus. And these are, applications and platforms that already have, maybe you've already got a replacement lined up, or you've already got a project lined up to replace them, or there's not a cloud equivalent, and you're just going to run it until it dies. So trim those out first, so you can focus on the things that are actually migration capable. So the other 4 of the 6 are the most common migration paths, the top 4 here. Rehosting is often called lift and shift, and it's generally the simplest approach, but it can limit some of the cloud-native opportunities we take advantage of. Replatforming, it generally means that the underlying architecture is going to stay the same in the cloud as it was on-prem, but the systems that run on the infrastructure may change. The replace option can involve moving to a different product with a new architecture, or the same product with a new service delivery model. Like moving from infrastructure as a service to software as a service, or moving from just on-prem VM to a software as a service. And then re-architecting involves redesigning the application and the whole workload and the infrastructure that supports it to use cloud native and often, but not always, open source tools and technologies and frameworks like serverless, Kubernetes and containerization, cloud native or serverless databases, streaming data ingestion, and maybe leveraging even spot instances for workloads that are not needed full time, but can be handled in batches on varying intervals. So at this point, we recommend you begin to nail down your foundational architecture. Start with your networking requirements. You can establish a resilient and performant foundation upon which your cloud solution can be built. If you're all in on the cloud, you may not need anything beyond a direct VPN just to manage the platform. If you host in your facility and data volumes are reasonable, you may consider a site-to-site VPN. If you have a large data volume coming from your on-prem system, options like AWS Direct Connect or Azure Express Route that can enable low latency connectivity directly into the cloud provider's backbone, so your data does not ever have to traverse the public internet. If your applications require domain membership, then you'll want to consider whether you'll connect to your on-prem domain controller or deploy a new one to the cloud environment. If you use Windows authentication, for example, you may need domain connectivity. However, you could also consider shifting to other authentication mechanisms like SAML, and that's a good way to get away from that need for a domain if the application doesn't require it otherwise. Security has long been a concern with cloud environments, but the reality is that native tooling and push-button options at your disposal give you incredible power and flexibility to secure your environment. The care should be taken to properly define user roles and responsibilities and implement a proper change management framework, and to avoid human error are responsible for most system breaches that we hear about in the news. Consider from the outset deploying encryption in transit and at rest across your cloud landing zone. It's simple to deploy and maintain in modern cloud environments, and most would consider it a best practice. Data protection is an extension of security. Snapshots and backups can be scheduled and retained or rotated as needed. Make sure you balance an appropriate amount of history with the storage cost of maintaining it. The nice thing is that we have that visibility into the specific costs and can address it and make that trade-off decision. Disaster recovery and resiliency. They're features in any modern cloud platform that are extremely robust and attractive from this standpoint. So rather than manage dedicated DR sites or colo facilities, you can consider several scenarios from hot cold deployments to pilot light, or have a completely load balanced redundant deployment that spans geographic regions so that you are going to maintain business continuity in the event of a catastrophic event, maybe a hurricane or something like that, or a pandemic that wipes out the workers around or keeps the workers near a data center from going in to manage it. All right, so we have a number of options there. But at the end of the day, you're going to want to consider the revenue impact of a system going down before you define your DR strategy. If it can be down for 8 hours and it's not going to affect your revenue, then you probably don't want to go spend a lot of money on a hot backup situation. And lastly, consider investing in infrastructure as code from the outset. Through native tooling or third-party offerings, you can define your infrastructure in templated and parameterized configuration files that enable you to quickly redeploy your stack, whether it's in a disaster recovery situation or just to deploy a matching environment to test new software or architecture changes and so on. All right, so now that you have a plan in place, you can move on to the execution of your plan. You've nailed down the macro and the micro migration plans. You've checked all the boxes. So this diagram represents the general steps that we would go through and we recommend you think about following as you go through your migration. These could vary slightly depending on your migration strategy and architecture, but you'll start by deploying your foundational framework. This includes your, the actual account that you're running in, whether it's Azure, AWS, or some other provider. Setting up your identity and access management, your networking solution, your security, setting up any automation, as we talked about your infrastructure as code or scheduling, patching, and things like that. And then another critical thing that's not as relevant for on-premise solutions is making sure you have a tagging and cost management strategy. We can tag individual resources to different workloads or different business units, and that gives us that granular ability to track budget and costs across those workloads. Once we have that in place, this first step would really be part of kind of the big bang approach, or even the hybrid approach, where we deploy our foundational network, we deploy our applications, and then we migrate our data. Okay, we start with maybe one database, or maybe we can do it all at once if you're not doing phased. Moving on from there, migrate your applications, establish that connectivity, make sure everything's configured properly, your scheduled jobs are running. Move on to step 4, where you validate and document. And then you'll go through, there are always going to be some minor things that we can adjust to adapt to the cloud. So we'll go through an initial optimization exercise and take advantage of some of those opportunities that we have. And we'll speak to a couple of those in a minute. And then finally, cut over. And if you're going through a phased approach, then you would you continue that on to another round. Now, finally, now that you're live in production, you're going to want to not only operate tactically from day to day, but also strategically to optimize your environment. So it's important that these are not just one-time tasks. They should be evaluated and actioned continuously. So within the cost optimization pillar, we have several considerations. Continuous right-sizing enables you to start with what you need now and grow with your business demand, rather than sizing your servers or your assets for a multi-year growth plan out the gate and paying for capacity that you do not yet need. Using reserve or spot capacity can reduce your infrastructure costs by 20 to 50%, depending upon your level of commitment, whether you go 1 year, 3 year, or just use spot as needed. The cost attribution and budget alerts can help track overrun and ensure your monthly budget expectations remain accurate. We talk about agility and granular cost management. Well, with that agility, we may have developers who each have their own cloud account to deploy prototypes and stuff like that. But all it takes is for one person to forget to turn off an instance at the end of the day after they're doing a prototype, and that runs over the weekend, and suddenly you've got an extra $1,000 in cost that you weren't planning on. So, using budget alerts and things like that can help to mitigate that risk, and also give your developers, great awareness of what the financial impact of their decisions is as well. The next pillar, talking about process automation. Patching can be automated through native tooling. Backups and disaster recovery plans, you want to test those occasionally to ensure that they're effective. Don't wait until you have a failure to see if it's going to work. Self-healing and auto-scaling, they can help you meet seasonal business demands without committing to these resources year-round, especially in retail environments. One thing that's kind of definitely cloud native is to automate the shutdown of dev and QA resources. So just shutting down these resources on the weekends alone can immediately save you 30% with on-demand pricing. If you just run them during business hours and shut them down beyond that, then you could save up to 70% on those non-production workloads. So if your development model, if your culture supports that, it's a definite consideration you should keep in mind. All right, and then the last section here is just improving operational efficiency. You can set up hardware monitoring and alerting to enable proactive investigation of problems. Data transfer can be costly, so after you get a baseline and a couple months of bills to see what's happening, we recommend you go back and try to optimize that. There are numerous options that we can use to drastically reduce this spend. And then lastly, leverage the latest tooling by keeping up with new products and feature releases within your chosen platform. You'll often find operational cost efficiencies through this exercise. And generally that's just as simple as trying to, finding a newsletter that kind of tracks, feature releases, or following the blog posts, following them on Twitter to see, what new things are coming out that you can leverage and maybe get away from something you had to custom build to meet a need. All right, so this actually wraps up the migration process recommendations that I have for you. I hope that you've gleaned some insights that'll guide your project as you consider an analytics cloud migration. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dave for a couple of closing thoughts.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chance. I think it's really neat to see kind of going through all the things that you've got to think about and get right, and it's a lot to think about. But one of the things that we're offering our clients is a 1 hour cloud strategy session. It's obviously we hope that you want to work with us afterwards, but if we're also very happy just to give you another set of eyes or somebody to to look at your plans and give you some ideas just for the hour. So kind of depending on what you're doing, you may want to talk with Chance, or one of the folks on his team. It's focused primarily on AWS, but they're capable on other platforms. We've got experts on Microsoft and Snowflake and other platforms as well. So kind of depends on where you are. We've got folks to cover that, but that's one of the things we want to offer. And if you want to get a hold of us, you can email us any of the email addresses that you've been interacting with, or check out our website, or give us a call. Happy to help with that. So with that, I'm gonna actually turn it back over to Tracy and wrap up this webinar. So really appreciate everybody taking the time to spend with us this afternoon, and hope that it was a valuable use of your time. So Tracy.
Great, thanks, Dave. So thanks, Dave and Chance, so much for presenting. And again, thank you to everyone who joined us today. Hope that you learned something and enjoyed the presentation. So just a couple of closing remarks. As Dave mentioned, if you're interested in that cloud migration meeting or anything else, or you have any questions, I'll actually be sending everyone a follow-up email that's on this webinar. It will have a link to the recording, and also then you'll have it's actually my email address, so I can direct you to someone who can help you out. So once again, thanks for joining. I'm going to go ahead and conclude our webinar. Hope everyone has a great day. Thanks.